The rain came down in sheets that night, turning the desert into a maze of mud and darkness. Caleb Rourke heard the knock, 3 deliberate strikes against weathered wood, and knew immediately something was wrong. No traveler came this far into the borderlands without reason. No woman traveled these roads at all. Yet when he opened the door, 4 of them stood there, drenched and shivering, their dark eyes reflecting lamplight like animals caught in a trap. The oldest one stepped forward, water streaming from her black hair, and spoke words that stopped his heart. "We came to have sex with you." Behind them, in the distance, he heard what she clearly heard too, the sound of horses moving through rain. They were being hunted. Caleb's hand tightened on the doorframe. The woman who'd spoken, tall, with a thin scar cutting across her chin, held his gaze without flinching. Her sisters stood behind her in descending height, like steps leading down into hell. The youngest couldn't have been more than 18, her arm wrapped in cloth already soaked through with something darker than rain. "You need to leave," Caleb said, his voice rough from disuse. He hadn't spoken to another person in weeks. "We cannot." The woman's English was precise, learned somewhere formal. "The men who follow us will not stop. We have been running for 3 days." Caleb looked past them into the storm. The landscape offered no shelter for miles except his cabin. If someone was tracking them, they'd be here within the hour. Every instinct screamed at him to shut the door, to return to the isolation he'd carefully constructed over the past 2 years. Getting involved meant questions. Questions meant attention. Attention meant his past would find him. But the youngest one swayed on her feet, and the woman with the scar caught her elbow. "Please," she said, and that single word carried more weight than any threat could have. "We know what men want. We will give it to you. Just let us stay until morning." The way she said it, flat, transactional, like offering payment for grain, made something twist in Caleb's chest. He'd heard desperation before. This was something beyond it. This was women who'd learned that their bodies were the only currency anyone would accept. He stepped back and opened the door wider. They moved past him quickly, bringing the smell of rain and wood smoke and something metallic. Blood. Caleb closed the door and turned to find all 4 of them standing in the center of his one-room cabin, water pooling at their feet. They wore clothes that might have been fine once, dresses with careful stitching, now torn and mud-stained. The youngest was definitely bleeding, her face pale in the lamplight. "Sit down," Caleb said, gesturing to the rough wooden chairs near the fireplace. "Let me see that arm." The woman with the scar translated quickly in a language he didn't understand. The 3 younger ones looked at her, then at him, their expressions caught between fear and something harder to name. They didn't move. "I'm not going to hurt you," Caleb said. "That is what they all say." The woman stepped between him and her sisters, her body language shifting into something defensive despite her earlier offer. "Before they take what they want anyway." Caleb held up both hands, palms out. "Then we'll establish some rules. You sleep there." He pointed to his bed in the corner. "I sleep here." He gestured to the floor near the door. "Nobody touches nobody unless it's to tend wounds. Come morning, you tell me who's chasing you and why, and I'll decide what happens next." She studied him for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face for the lie she clearly expected to find. Caleb kept his expression neutral, but he felt the weight of her gaze like a physical thing. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with softness, all sharp angles and harder edges. Survivor's beauty. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why what? Why help us if you want nothing in return?" "Because 2 years ago I didn't help, and 3 women died." The thought came unbidden, and Caleb shoved it down deep where it belonged. "Maybe I'm just tired of being alone," he said instead. It wasn't quite a lie. She translated again, and this time the 3 younger ones moved cautiously toward the bed. The woman with the scar remained standing, watching him. "My name is Ayanna," she said. "These are my sisters." "Caleb." "Caleb," she repeated, testing the shape of his name. "You should know, the men hunting us are not ordinary travelers. They are traders. They buy and sell women like us, and they do not forgive those who interfere with their property." Outside, the rain hammered against the cabin walls, but underneath it, faint and growing closer, Caleb heard what Ayanna clearly heard too, the sound of horses, and they were moving fast. Caleb moved to the window and peered through the gap in the shutters. 3 riders approached through the rain, their horses dark shapes against darker sky. They rode with purpose, not the casual pace of travelers seeking shelter. These were men who knew exactly where they were going, Put out the lamp, he said. Ayanna translated, and one of her sisters, the tall one with work-hardened hands, moved quickly to extinguish the flame. Darkness swallowed the cabin. In the sudden quiet, Caleb could hear his own heartbeat and the shallow breathing of 4 terrified women. The horses stopped outside. Boots hit mud with heavy sounds. Then silence except for the rain. "Rourke," a voice called out. "We know you're in there. We're looking for some property that wandered off. 4 Apache girls, you seen them?" Property. The word made Caleb's jaw tighten. He'd heard men talk like that before, back when he wore a uniform and followed orders he later regretted. Back when he told himself that what happened to native women wasn't his concern. "Haven't seen anyone," Caleb called back. "Just me and the storm." A pause. Then laughter, cruel and knowing. "That's so. Funny thing, we followed tracks right to your door. Fresh tracks. 4 sets. You sure you want to lie to us?" "Rourke!" Behind him, Caleb heard Ayanna's sharp intake of breath. She stood close enough that he could feel the heat coming off her body despite her wet clothes. Close enough that her arm brushed his when she moved. The contact sent something electric through him that had nothing to do with fear. "The man asking is named Dutch Carver," she whispered, her lips nearly touching his ear. "He bought us 3 weeks ago from men who raided our village. We escaped 2 days ago. He will not leave without us." Her breath was warm against his neck. Caleb forced himself to focus on the immediate problem rather than the way his body responded to her proximity. "How many men does he travel with?" Caleb asked quietly. 6. These 3 are just the hunters. The others wait at camp with more girls. "Open the door, Rourke." Carver's voice had lost its friendly edge. "We can do this easy or hard. Your choice." Caleb's rifle leaned against the wall near the door, loaded and ready. He could probably take 1, maybe 2 before they returned fire, but that would mean a shootout with 4 women trapped inside a wooden cabin. The walls wouldn't stop bullets. Hell, they barely stopped wind. He needed time to think. "Give me a minute," Caleb called out. "Let me get dressed." "You got 30 seconds. Ayanna's hand found his arm in the darkness, her fingers digging into his forearm with surprising strength. "Do not give us to them. Please. Whatever you want from us, we will give it. Just do not let them take us back." In the dim light seeping through the shutters, Caleb could see her face. She was terrified, but beneath the fear was something fierce. She was a fighter who'd been forced to offer surrender as her only weapon. "I'm not giving you to anyone," Caleb said. The words came out rougher than he intended. "But I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" She searched his face, her dark eyes reflecting what little light existed. For a moment, her hand remained on his arm, her touch burning through the fabric of his shirt. Then she nodded once. "What do we do?" "You're going to hide. There's a root cellar under the floorboards near the bed. Take your sisters down there and stay quiet no matter what you hear. And you? I'm going to convince them you were never here. They will not believe you. I know." Outside, Carver's patience ran out. "Time's up, Rourke." The door exploded inward with a crash of splintering wood, and 3 men filled the doorway with drawn revolvers and cruel grins. They found Caleb standing alone in the darkness, his hands empty and raised. But they also found 4 sets of wet footprints leading across his floor. And Carver's grin widened into something savage. Dutch Carver was a big man with a face that looked like it had been broken and reset wrong multiple times. He stepped into the cabin, his revolver pointed casually at Caleb's chest while his 2 men spread out to either side. Rain dripped from his hat brim, forming dark puddles on the floor that mixed with the footprints already there. "Now, Rourke," Carver said, his voice carrying the false friendliness of a man who enjoyed his work too much. "You want to explain those tracks? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been harboring stolen property." "I don't know what you're talking about." Caleb kept his hands raised, his eyes tracking all 3 men. The one on the left was nervous, his trigger finger twitching. The one on the right looked bored. Carver himself was the real danger. Calm, controlled, enjoying every moment. "See, that's a problem." Carver walked slowly around the cabin's perimeter, his boots heavy on the wooden planks. He paused near the bed, studying the floor. "Because I'm a reasonable man. I pay good money for merchandise, and I expect to keep what's mine. Those 4 girls cost me $300. That's not money I'm willing to lose. $300 for 4 human lives. The math made Caleb sick. "Even if someone was here," Caleb said carefully. "They're gone now. Storm like this, they could be anywhere." Carver's laugh was ugly. "You know what I think, Rourke? I think you're the kind of man who makes mistakes, the kind who thinks he can save people who don't want saving. He moved closer, his revolver never wavering. I heard about you. Ex-cavalry. Discharged after you refused orders during a raid on an Apache village. Cost some of your men their lives because you went soft. The words hit like physical blows. Caleb's jaw clenched, but he kept his expression neutral. That mission, the one that ended his military career, had haunted him for 2 years. He'd refused to participate in what he knew would be a massacre. His commanding officer had called it cowardice. Caleb called it the only decent thing he'd ever done in uniform, even if it came too late to matter. Ancient history, Caleb said. Is it? Carver smiled. Because it seems to me like you're making the same mistake twice. Thinking you can interfere. Thinking there's some kind of moral high ground in the middle of nowhere. He gestured with his gun toward the floor. I'm going to search this cabin, Rourke. And when I find what I'm looking for, I'm going to make an example out of you. Fair warning. One of Carver's men moved toward the bed, and Caleb's pulse spiked. The root cellar was right there, concealed by loose boards. If they found it, if they found the women, everything would get worse fast. Wait, Caleb said. Carver held up a hand, stopping his man. Finally ready to talk sense? Beneath the floorboards, Caleb knew Ayanna was listening to every word. She would understand what came next. She had to. They were here, Caleb admitted. 4 Apache women. Showed up about an hour ago, soaking wet, scared out of their minds. And I told them to keep moving. Gave them some food and sent them east toward the territorial line. Figured they had maybe 30 minutes head start before you showed up. It was a good lie. Believable. It gave Carver something to chase that wasn't in this cabin. Carver studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Ben, check outside. See if you can pick up tracks heading east. The nervous man hurried out into the rain. Caleb allowed himself to breathe slightly easier. If they bought it, if they left to chase ghosts. Of course, Carver said conversationally. You could be lying. Could be they're still here somewhere. Hiding like rabbits. He moved suddenly, fast for a big man, and pressed his revolver against Caleb's forehead. So I'm going to search anyway. And if I find them, you're going to watch what I do to them before I put a bullet in your skull. Understand? The metal was cold against Caleb's skin. In the silence that followed, he heard something that made his blood freeze. From beneath the floorboards, barely audible over the rain, came the sound of someone coughing. Carver's eyes lit up with triumph. Well, well, he said softly. What do we have here? The cough came again, weak and wet. The youngest sister, the one with the wounded arm. Caleb cursed himself for not checking how bad the injury really was. Infection moved fast in wounds like that, especially in damp conditions. Pull up those boards, Carver ordered his remaining man, his gun never leaving Caleb's head. The man moved toward the bed, but before he could reach it, the boards lifted from below. Ayanna emerged first, her hands raised, her face carved from stone. She climbed out with the careful dignity of someone refusing to give her captors the satisfaction of seeing her crawl. Her 3 sisters followed, the youngest leaning heavily on the tall one. Well, hello there, ladies, Carver said, his voice dripping false warmth. Miss me? Ayanna's eyes found Caleb's across the cabin. In that look, he saw accusation, resignation, and something else. Understanding maybe that he'd tried, that sometimes trying wasn't enough. On your knees, Carver said to the women. All of you. They knelt, their wet clothes clinging to their bodies. Carver holstered his weapon and walked a slow circle around them, inspecting his recovered property. When he reached Ayanna, he grabbed a handful of her long black hair and jerked her head back, exposing her throat. This one's a fighter, he said, speaking to Caleb but looking at Ayanna. Had to beat her twice already to teach her manners. Guess she needs another lesson. Leave them alone, Caleb said. The words came out harder than he intended. Or what? Carver released Ayanna's hair and turned to face Caleb fully. You going to stop me? You're unarmed, outnumbered, and way out of your depth here. Cavalry boy. I'm asking you to take them and leave. You got what you came for. Oh, I'm taking them. But first, Carver pulled a knife from his belt, the blade catching lamplight. First, I think we need to make sure you understand what happens to men who interfere with my business. He moved toward the youngest sister, the one who was coughing. Ayanna started to rise, but Carver's man shoved her back down. That one's already dying, Carver said casually. Infection in the arm. Probably won't last the week. Hardly worth what I paid for her. He grabbed the girl's wounded arm. And she screamed, "Might as well put her down now. Save myself the trouble of feeding her." "No!" Ayana's control finally broke. She surged to her feet despite the gun now pointed at her. "Please. She is my sister. My blood. I will do anything. Anything." Carver's smile was predatory. "Well now, that's interesting. What exactly can you offer that I don't already own?" Ayana's jaw worked. Caleb could see the war happening behind her eyes. Pride versus desperation. Dignity versus survival. She'd already made this calculation once tonight, when she'd stood at his door and offered the only thing she thought men valued. "There is a camp," she said finally, her voice hollow. 2 days north. Other women from our village who escaped. 20, maybe more. I can lead you to them." It was a lie. Had to be. But it was a good one. Delivered with just enough broken reluctance to sound true. Carver studied her. "Why would you sell out your own people?" "Because she is my sister. My family. The others." Ayana's voice cracked convincingly. "They are just women I knew. They mean nothing compared to blood." The youngest sister understood enough English to look betrayed. Perfect acting. Or maybe real pain at having to say such things even as lies. Ayana didn't look at her. Carver considered this for a long moment. Then he sheathed his knife. "Fine. You lead us to this camp, and I'll let your baby sister live. For now." He grabbed Ayana by the arm and pulled her close, his face inches from hers. "But if you're lying to me, if we ride for 2 days and find nothing, I'll make you watch while I do things to her that'll make death seem kind. We clear?" Ayana nodded once, her expression carved from ice. "Good." Carver shoved her toward the door. "Round up the others. We leave now." His men moved to comply, hauling the 3 younger sisters to their feet. The youngest could barely stand, fevered and shaking. The tall one supported her while the third sister, the one called Kaya, looked at Caleb with desperate, pleading eyes. Ayana moved toward the door but paused when she reached Caleb. For just a moment her hand brushed his, deliberate, lingering. Her fingers were cold but her palm was warm, and the contact sent electricity up his arm. "Thank you for trying," she whispered, so quiet only he could hear. Then, even quieter, "The rifle," when they turned their backs. Before Caleb could process what she meant, Carver grabbed her and shoved her through the door into the rain. The cabin emptied of everyone except Caleb and the man Carver had left behind, the bored-looking one who now pointed his revolver at Caleb with casual indifference. "Boss says to make sure you don't follow," the man said. "Nothing personal." He cocked the hammer. Outside, horses whinnied and saddles creaked. They were leaving, taking the 4 women back into hell, and Caleb was about to die unable to stop it. Just like 2 years ago, just like always. The rifle, when they turned their backs. Understanding hit Caleb a half-second before the man's finger tightened on the trigger. His eyes flicked to where his rifle leaned against the wall, too far, impossible to reach. But Ayana hadn't meant for him to grab it. She'd moved it. The explosion of gunfire filled the cabin, deafening in the enclosed space. But Caleb was already diving sideways as the bullet tore through empty air where his chest had been. He hit the floor hard, rolled, and his hand found what Ayana had hidden beneath the edge of his bed frame. His hunting knife. The one he kept strapped to the underside. The gunman was fast, already swinging his revolver to track Caleb's movement. But Caleb was faster. 20 years of cavalry training didn't disappear just because you stopped wearing the uniform. He came up from the roll in a single fluid motion, closed the distance before the man could fire again, and drove the knife upward beneath the ribcage. The man's eyes went wide. His revolver clattered to the floor. He made a wet choking sound and collapsed. Caleb stood over the body, his hands shaking, blood hot on his fingers. He'd killed men before, too many men. In battles and raids he'd tried hard to forget, but it never got easier. The weight of it never lessened. He had maybe 3 minutes before Carver realized his man wasn't coming. 3 minutes to decide if he was really going to do this again. Chase after people who didn't belong to him. Interfere in business that would only bring him more trouble. 2 years ago he hadn't chased. He'd let it happen. And 3 women had died because he'd chosen safety over action. Not this time. Caleb grabbed his rifle, checked the load, and shoved extra ammunition into his pockets. He pulled on his coat, found the wide-brimmed hat that kept rain out of his eyes, and paused at the threshold. The cabin had been his sanctuary, his escape from the world and its endless violence. Walking through that door meant giving all of that up. He thought of Ayana's eyes in the darkness, the way her hand had lingered against his, the fierce intelligence behind her terror. She'd saved his life by hiding that knife, knowing he'd understand, trusting him to act when the moment came. Caleb stepped into the rain. The storm had intensified, turning the landscape into sheets of water and mud. Tracking would be nearly impossible in these conditions, but Carver's group was large and moving fast. They'd leave signs, broken brush, disturbed earth, horse manure. Caleb had tracked Apache war parties through worse terrain than this. He found their trail heading northwest, away from the territorial line Carver claimed to believe in. That meant he hadn't bought Ayana's lie about the camp to the north, or he was testing her, seeing if she'd lead him true before deciding whether to keep her alive. Either way, they wouldn't stop until dawn. Men like Carver traveled at night when they had cargo that might attract unwanted attention. Caleb moved through the darkness, his rifle ready, his body falling into the rhythm of the hunt. Rain plastered his hair to his skull and ran into his eyes, but he ignored it. Somewhere ahead, Ayana and her sisters rode toward whatever fate Carver had planned for them, unless Caleb reached them first. An hour passed. The trail led deeper into broken country, ravines and rock formations that provided cover but also made ambush easy. Carver would have scouts watching their back trail. Caleb would have to be careful. Then he heard it. Voices carried on the wind, distorted by rain but unmistakable. Male voices, rough with drink and exhaustion. They'd stopped to rest the horses. Caleb crept closer, using the terrain for cover, until he could make out shapes through the downpour. 7 horses, not 6. Carver had met up with more of his men. That changed the odds considerably. He counted 4 men visible around a makeshift shelter formed by a rocky overhang. The women sat huddled together nearby, their hands bound behind their backs. Even from this distance, Caleb could pick out Ayana's silhouette, the proud way she held her spine despite everything. One of the men approached her, said something Caleb couldn't hear, and grabbed her by the hair. She didn't flinch, didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. The man slapped her hard enough that her head snapped sideways. Something dark and furious ignited in Caleb's chest. He'd spent 2 years trying to become someone who didn't care, who didn't get involved, who let the world's cruelties pass him by without response. That man died the moment Ayana had whispered thank you in his cabin. Caleb checked his ammunition one more time, then began to move into position. 4 men, 1 rifle, 6 shots. The math worked if he was fast enough and lucky enough. And if he wasn't, at least he'd die trying to do the right thing for once. Caleb positioned himself on high ground overlooking the camp, his rifle braced against a boulder slick with rain. From this vantage point, he had clear sight lines to all 4 visible men, but that left 3 unaccounted for, probably sleeping or tending to horses beyond his view. He couldn't take the shot yet, not with so many variables. Then Ayana's head turned slightly, as if sensing something in the darkness. Her eyes swept the ridgeline where Caleb crouched, and though he knew she couldn't possibly see him through the rain and shadows, she seemed to look directly at him. Her lips moved, forming silent words he couldn't read but somehow understood. Wait. One of the men, not Carver, but someone equally brutal-looking, walked over to Ayana and cut the ropes binding her hands. He hauled her to her feet and shoved her toward a separate outcropping away from her sisters. "Carver wants to talk to you private," the man said loud enough for Caleb to hear. "Got some questions about that camp you mentioned." Ayana walked ahead of him, her movement stiff but controlled. When they disappeared behind the rocks, Caleb's pulse spiked. He knew what happened to women taken somewhere private by men like these. He was already moving, abandoning his position for lower ground, when he heard Ayana scream. The sound cut through the rain like a blade. Not a scream of pain, but of rage. Sharp, deliberate, meant to draw attention. Caleb broke into a run, rifle ready, no longer caring about stealth. He rounded the outcropping to find Ayana standing over the man's body, his own knife buried in his throat. Her chest heaved with exertion, rain streaming down her face. And when she saw Caleb, something fierce and wild flashed in her eyes. "I told you to wait," she said. Before Caleb could respond, shouts erupted from the camp. The other men had heard the scream. They'd be here in seconds. "How many more?" Caleb asked, moving beside her. "6 total, including Carver." Ayana yanked the knife free and wiped it on the dead man's shirt. 3 are drunk, 2 are sleeping. Carver is the only real threat. "Your sisters?" Tied but unharmed. She met his eyes, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. recognition of equals, of survivors who understood what needed to be done. We end this now. Together. There was no time for debate. Footsteps pounded toward their position. Caleb raised his rifle just as two men came around the rocks with revolvers drawn. He fired twice, dropping both before they could get off a shot. The reports echoed across the ravine, impossibly loud. That left 3 men and Carver. "Get your sisters," Caleb said. "Take the horses and ride east. Don't stop until—" "No." Ayana's voice was iron. "I am not running anymore, not from him." "Ayana—" She grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into his sleeve with fierce intensity. "You came back for us. You could have stayed safe, but you came." Her face was inches from his, rain-slicked and beautiful and terrible in its determination. "Now let me fight beside you." Before Caleb could argue, Dutch Carver's voice boomed through the storm. "Rourke, I know you're out there, you stupid son of a bitch. You killed my men. You stole my property. Now you got exactly 1 chance to walk away before I lose my temper." Caleb and Ayana exchanged a look. She handed him the bloody knife, then disappeared into the rain, moving toward where her sisters were held. Caleb watched her go for a heartbeat too long, distracted by the way she moved, like violence wrapped in grace. He forced himself to focus. "I'm not walking away, Carver," Caleb called back. "Those women aren't your property. They're not anyone's property." Silence. Then Carver's laughter, cold and mean. "You really are stupid. You know what I got here, cavalry boy? I got 3 scared little Apache girls with knives at their throats. You want them to live? You come out where I can see you. Hands up, or I start cutting." Caleb's jaw clenched. It was a smart play. Force him into the open where Carver's remaining men could gun him down. But then Ayana's voice cut through the darkness, strong and defiant. "He does not have us, Caleb. We are free. Do not surrender." Confusion rippled through Caleb, followed by understanding. Ayana hadn't gone to save her sisters. She'd armed them. And now 4 Apache women who'd been bought, sold, beaten, and hunted were about to show Dutch Carver what happened when prey became predators. The screaming started a moment later, and it wasn't the women doing the screaming. Caleb ran toward the chaos, his rifle ready, but his finger off the trigger. In the confusion of rain and darkness, he couldn't risk shooting, not with 4 women somewhere in that mess of violence. He found the first of Carver's men stumbling backward with a knife wound across his gun arm, unable to hold his weapon. Nasha, the tall sister with work-hardened hands, stood over him with blood on her knuckles and fury in her eyes. When the man tried to rise, she kicked him hard in the ribs and he stayed down. The second man lay motionless near the horses, his throat opened cleanly. Kaya crouched beside him, shaking, the bloody knife still gripped in her hand. She looked up when Caleb approached, her eyes wild with shock at what she'd been forced to do. "It's over," Caleb said gently. "You're safe now." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. Not yet. Dutch Carver stood in the center of the camp with his revolver pressed against Tallulah's head. The youngest sister whimpered, her wounded arm hanging useless at her side, her face pale with fever and terror. Carver's other arm was wrapped around her throat, using her as a shield. "Drop the rifle, Rourke," Carver snarled. Blood ran from a cut above his eye. Someone had gotten to him before he'd grabbed the girl. "Drop it or I paint the rocks with her brains." Caleb lowered his rifle slowly, his mind racing through scenarios. At this distance, in this rain, with Carver using Tallulah as cover, there was no clean shot. Any attempt would get the girl killed. "Let her go," Caleb said. "Your men are dead or dying. You've got no leverage left." "I got this leverage right here." Carver shook Tallulah hard enough to make her cry out. "And I got 6 bullets that say I walk out of here alive. Where you going to walk to?" Ayana's voice came from behind Caleb, steady and cold. "Your horses are gone. Your camp is destroyed. Your business is finished." She stepped into view beside Caleb, and the sight of her made something in Caleb's chest tighten. She was soaked with rain and blood, most of it not hers, and she moved with the dangerous calm of someone who'd crossed a line and found freedom on the other side. "You little bitch," Carver hissed. "I should have killed you the first day." "Yes," Ayana agreed. "You should have." Then everything happened at once. Tallulah, despite her fever and fear, went suddenly limp in Carver's grip, dead weight that threw him off balance for just a second. Ayana was already moving, crossing the distance with impossible speed, and Caleb understood what she was doing a heartbeat before she did it. She was giving him the shot. Caleb's rifle came up smooth and fast, years of training taking over. Carver tried to adjust, tried to aim at Ayanna instead, but she was too close and moving too fast. His revolver tracked toward her chest. Caleb fired. The bullet took Carver high in the shoulder, spinning him sideways and tearing the gun from his hand. He released Tallulah, who collapsed into the mud. Ayanna hit him like a storm, driving her shoulder into his wounded side and taking him down hard. They rolled in the mud, Carver fighting despite his injury, his hands finding Ayanna's throat. She clawed at his face, going for his eyes, both of them beyond words now, just pure survival instinct. Caleb was running before they stopped rolling, but Nasha got there first. She picked up Carver's dropped revolver with both hands and aimed it at his head with the careful deliberation of someone who'd imagined this moment 1,000 times. "Nasha, no!" Ayanna choked out the words even as Carver's hands tightened on her throat. "We are not like him. We do not become him." Nasha's hands shook. The revolver wavered. Behind her, Kaya and Tallulah watched with hollow eyes. 4 women who'd been bought, beaten, hunted, and nearly broken, standing at the edge of becoming something they could never come back from. "Let the law have him," Caleb said quietly, though he wasn't sure there was any law this far into nowhere that would care about what happened to Apache women. Carver laughed, blood bubbling at his lips. "What law? You think anyone gives a damn about?" Ayanna's fist caught him in the throat, cutting off his words. She pulled free of his grip and stood, breathing hard, staring down at the man who'd turned her and her sisters into merchandise. "We do not kill him because he is not worth it," she said finally. "We let him live with the knowledge that 4 women he tried to break are the reason he failed. That is punishment enough." She turned to Nasha and gently lowered her sister's hands. The revolver dropped into the mud. Carver tried to rise, but Caleb's boot on his wounded shoulder kept him down. "The Territorial Marshal's office is 2 days south," Caleb said. "We take him there. Let them decide what happens next." Ayanna met his eyes, and in that look was everything they'd been through. The terror and the trust, the violence and the survival. Something had changed between them in the hours since she'd stood at his door and offered the only thing she thought he'd accept. Now she knew he'd accepted something entirely different. Her humanity, her strength, her right to choose her own path, and maybe, just maybe, a future that didn't involve running anymore. 3 days later, Caleb stood outside the Territorial Marshal's office and watched Dutch Carver being led away in chains. The Marshal had been skeptical at first. 4 Apache women accusing a white trader of trafficking was the kind of case most lawmen ignored. But the bodies of 6 dead men and testimony from Caleb, an ex-cavalry officer, had been enough to tip the scales. Carver would hang. The law moved slowly out here, but it moved. "Will it stick?" Ayanna asked quietly, standing beside Caleb on the wooden walkway. "Or will money and influence find a way to free him?" "It'll stick," Caleb said. "I made sure of it." He'd spent 2 days writing detailed accounts, tracking down witnesses, and calling in favors from men he'd served with who still believed in doing the right thing. Carver's operation had been larger than anyone suspected. Dozens of women bought and sold across the territories. When the full scope came to light, even the most corrupt officials couldn't look away. Ayanna nodded slowly, watching until Carver disappeared into the jail. Then she turned to Caleb, and the morning sun caught her face in a way that made his breath catch. Without the desperation and fear that had defined their first meeting, he could see her clearly now. Strong, intelligent, beautiful, in the way of people who'd survived what should have broken them. "What will you do now?" she asked. Caleb had been asking himself the same question. His cabin was still there, still offering the isolation he'd thought he wanted, but something had changed in him during that night in the rain. The man who'd hidden from the world for 2 years was gone, burned away by the simple act of choosing to care again. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "You, my sisters and I, we will go home, back to what remains of our village." Ayanna's expression grew distant. "It will not be the same. Too much has been taken, but it is where we belong. That's a long journey. Dangerous. We have survived worse." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "And we know how to fight now." They stood in comfortable silence, neither quite ready to say goodbye, both knowing it was inevitable. Their paths had crossed in violence and desperation, but those paths led to different destinations. Then Ayanna turned to face him fully, her dark eyes serious. "That first night, when we came to your door, I said terrible things, made an offer that shamed me even as I spoke the words. You were trying to survive," Caleb said. Yes, but also I was wrong about who you were. What you would want from us. She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell rain still clinging to her hair despite the dry morning. I thought all men were the same, that the only value we had was in our bodies. Our submission. You proved me wrong. Ayanna. She placed a finger against his lips, silencing him. The touch was electric, deliberate, nothing like the desperate contact in his cabin. This was choice, not necessity. Let me finish, she said softly. You gave us something more valuable than safety. You gave us back our ability to choose, to fight, to determine our own worth. Her hand moved from his lips to rest against his chest, over his heart. That is a debt I can never repay. You don't owe me anything. I know. Her smile widened slightly. That is why I want to give you something anyway. She rose on her toes and kissed him, gentle at first, then deeper, her hand curling into his shirt. It lasted only a moment, but in that moment Caleb felt 2 years of isolation crack open like ice in spring. When she pulled back, her eyes held both sadness and warmth. A better memory than the one we started with, she said. So you remember that not all meetings in rain and darkness end in tragedy. Before Caleb could respond, Nasha appeared in the doorway of the boarding house where they'd spent the night. We are ready, she said in halting English, then smiled shyly at Caleb. Thank you, Caleb Rourke, for everything. Kaya and Tallulah emerged behind her. Tallulah's arm was properly bandaged now, the fever broken with medicine from the town doctor. She looked fragile still, but alive, healing. All 4 sisters stood together, no longer victims of circumstance but survivors who'd reclaimed their agency. They left as the sun climbed higher, 4 women on horseback heading north toward home. Ayanna looked back once, her hand raised in farewell, and Caleb raised his own in response. He watched until they disappeared into the distance, then turned south. Not back to his cabin, not back to isolation. The marshal had mentioned other cases, other women who needed help, other situations where someone willing to interfere might make a difference. Caleb had spent 2 years running from the guilt of inaction. Maybe it was time to spend the rest of his life running towards something instead. As he rode, he thought about Ayanna's words at his door that first night, words meant to secure survival through the only means she thought available. How wrong they'd both been about what would be asked and what would be given. She'd come seeking a transaction. They'd found something far more valuable instead. Respect, trust, the knowledge that sometimes the right thing to do was also the hardest thing to do. And somewhere in the territory ahead, there were other women who needed someone to make that choice. Caleb Rourke rode toward them, no longer a man hiding from his past, but one finally making peace with it. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another gripping tale from the untamed frontier, where courage and justice collide in unexpected ways. Don't forget to subscribe, and consider leaving a super chat to help us continue bringing you powerful stories like this one. Your support means everything to us.